there's got to be another mountaintop. There's got to be another mountaintop. There's always got to be another mountaintop. Or and it doesn't have to be bigger. It just has to be new. And I think it'd be cool to be a different mountain range as well. So like we're talking about, oh, maybe your baby's your baby. Like I think fatherhood, I'll look at fatherhood and maybe as like in an entrepreneurial lens, and future business. Like, I don't know, maybe I'll try services. Like, I don't know. So no, I'm never satisfied. I have this itch to like take on hard problems. I think probably the biggest thing would just be like, I want to tackle harder problems over time.
Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. If you haven't already, please be sure to hit subscribe if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts from. Also, check out the show notes. I have discount codes for picking up your copy of either Audacious or Break Barriers. I'm really excited for today's episode. We have a very special guest, Will Nitze. He's the founder and CEO of IQBAR, a leading brain and body nutrition startup based in Boston. After studying psychology and neuroscience as a Harvard undergrad, Will became fascinated with the human brain and how it functions. Then, in his mid-20s, he experienced chronic failings with his own brain that he traced back to his high-carb diet. By eliminating staples like bread, pasta, sugar from his regimen, he staged a full cognitive recovery. Will, we're going to be diving into this. I want to know what some of these chronic failings that you're referring to are. Today, IQBAR products are sold in more than 10,000 locations across the U.S. and on all major e-commerce platforms. While the company has grown and evolved over time, Will's mission of empowering doers through superior functional nutrition has never wavered. Will, thanks for joining me, my man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited.
Of course. Big fan of the product. So this was super cool. I was really glad that your team reached out and made this happen. I'm really glad to put the pieces together with regards to how it all came to be. So why don't we kick things off by just getting a little bit of a background on you, yourself, where you grew up and some of the background before this all got started.
Sure. Yeah, so I grew up in northern New Jersey. You were just mentioning Terry White and Willico. I actually went to middle school with him. Grew up in Morristown, New Jersey, and which was a fine place, not all that interesting, but good childhood. My parents, my dad is an engineer by trade, but bounced around biotech, and actually now he works in real estate. So he's done many things, but is not an entrepreneur. And then my mom has worked in social entrepreneurship. So she worked for a big company called Ashoka and has done other sort of entrepreneurial stuff, but all on the social entrepreneurship side and nonprofit side. And so that was my upbringing. I went to boarding school in Western Mass, Cow Pastures of Western Mass, and that was a good experience, I think, on the whole. And then took a year off. I lived in Cape Town, South Africa for a year, which was cool because that was 2010. So I got to see the World Cup and had a job down there and was living on my own. So that was a wild experience. And then went to Harvard undergrad, and here I am. Had a job out of school and then started IQBAR, but we can dive into any one of those junctures.
Yeah. So boarding school and then going to Cape Town. I mean, you say it like that's a normal trajectory. Most people aren't doing that. So walk me through that. What led you to boarding school to begin with?
It's an interesting one. I don't think I'll send my kid to boarding school. But my mom went to boarding school. Both my older brothers went. So it was just like a thing that people did in my family. I don't know. I never even I just assumed I would go to boarding school for whatever reason. It's kind of weird in retrospect. And then my brother went to a school called Deerfield, and I looked up to him at that time, and I was like, all right, I'll just do what he did. And then on the South Africa side, so I was going to go to Georgetown, and I got waitlisted at Harvard. And literally the day before graduation, I got in off the waitlist. So I did all these things my senior year. Everyone else was partying or whatever. And I got straight A's, retook the SAT, got a really, really good SAT score. I was grinding my whole senior year, just because it was going to give me a 10% better shot at getting into Harvard. And then the day before graduation, I got in, but not for that next year I got in for the year after. So they said, you can come in 2010, but you're going to have to figure out what to do. But I didn't have to do anything. They weren't even like, you have to do a job or you have to take classes. They're like, do whatever the hell you want. So I was like, okay, I might as well live abroad, right? You only get one chunk of 12 months where you can do literally anything at that age, once in your life. So World Cup was in South Africa. I was like, let's do that.
Love that. So growing up during that period, was academics the main focus in your life?
No, I mean, it was always important, but no, athletics were. I was a big soccer player. So, to me, the World Cup for me at that stage was winning the state cup, the New Jersey State Cup. And New Jersey is actually a really good sports state and soccer state in particular. And so I did that with my club team. It was all club, not school centric. And so our club team won that. And that was like this huge, climbing Everest moment for me at that point in my life. And then got really into cross country as well. And then I got really into chess. Um, we just had a good chess team at my school and I sort of picked it up and I was pretty good at it. And then all of a sudden I was going to national chess championship tournaments and I won the New Jersey State Chess Championship I think it was seventh or eighth grade. So academics were important, but it was one piece of the puzzle and those things always overshadowed academics.
I love that. Take us through the approach or, help the audience get an understanding of how the mind works for someone who takes on something like chess at an age like that and figures out a way to climb the ranks or to succeed in that specific field, right? Like that at that age, to kind of take up chess as a hobby in general, is a distinct, not everyone takes it up, but then to succeed in it is another level. To succeed at the levels that you succeeded at. And so I think I asked this question because I do think it lays a good foundation of who you are. Like you're very, very well rounded. That's one thing that's coming across very early on in this discussion. And even in reading your bio with regards to how you came to build the company and what you're doing now, you could tell that your brain works a little bit differently than everybody else's. So let's just go back to chess really quick. What did you appreciate about the game and how did you apply certain thought processes to succeed in the game?
Well, I just like competitive games, period, as a starting point. I really like anything competitive. Like business is a game in many ways, too. So I just like competitive things. And I like it. I like physically competitive as well as mentally competitive. I don't like all games. Like I don't do crosswords, for example. So I don't know why chess spoke to me. I think it was because I thought I was good at it. I think a lot of, I tried guitar and I wasn't good at that. And I tried it for a while and I just never got good. And for whatever reason, I tried chess and I was like kind of proficient at it pretty quickly. And so I was like, oh, and it's sort of a self-fulfilling loop that once you feel you're kind of good, you want to get 5% better than pretty good and 10, and then keep doing that over and over and over and over again. And then my parents encouraged it too. Like I had lessons, and I don't know. And then I did a tournament and I really liked that. It was like a cool environment. And there's just something cool about just going like head to head with someone and you're literally staring, you're 2 feet away. It's very intimate. And I also like the one-on-one nature. I had done team sports. And so you're right. You said the well-rounded thing. I mean, I would just say I like different things. And it was sort of exotic to have a one-on-one experience where you're battling one other person. And then there's environment too. Like I had a chess team at my school. Like I don't know if every school has that. I just happened to have that. And then also some friends, like some of my best friends played, and that influenced me. So I think it's a lot of things, but ultimately, if I kind of sucked at it from the get-go, like I wasn't doing that. So I think that's maybe like the biggest thing. I just had a propensity for it.
I want to, I guess, maybe see if there's a parallel here between with chess, you're always thinking several moves ahead. Generally speaking, when you think about how you applied that in other elements of your life, whether it's in business or in sport, wherever it is, were you the kind of person that just was always thinking about several steps ahead?
Yeah, everyone always says that about chess, and it is true. I don't think that's like the number one thing. I think maybe like a better analogy is it's like a canvas. There are infinite permutations of chess games. Like every game is its own piece of art, and because again, there's infinity ways to play a chess game, and I like being creative, and I'm not a literal artist. I've never been good at literal art, but I like creativity and diversity and an ever-changing challenge. And so I think about business the same way. There's so many permutations of ways to go about business. This year we could focus on these 5 retailers or those 5 or just 2 of the 5 or like focus on international. It's like there are infinite ways to play that game. And so like the way you choose to play it is your own sort of canvas. Um, so I don't know. I think that would probably be the parallel I would draw between the two.
Got it. Last question I have about chess. Do you still play?
I'm kind of rusty. I play online here and there. The annoying thing about it is if you slip and then you play someone who has been playing, like they'll just smoke you. Like it's not like a bike.
Yeah.
You do have to play a lot to stay sharp. So yes,
Got it.
but sporadically.
Got it. Okay. And then you answered the question I was going to ask after, because I wanted to ask, like, is it one of those things that you could pick it back up after you get to a certain level? And you answered that question. And so now I think we have a good framework of like just where your head must have been in these different facets of life leading up to college, and kind of making that move. When you went to college, what was the original plan? Did you know what you wanted to do? Did you have a specific major in mind?
I wanted to party first and foremost. I had worked very, very, very hard in middle school and high school, and then not worked hard in my year off. I partied a lot in my year off. I had a job, right? I showed up.
So you partied hard in Cape Town.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Big time. Um, and it was the World Cup, right? Like, I was living with a buddy who was kind of a degenerate too. And, you put a kid who's like 15 or, excuse me, like 18, 19 years old in Cape Town with a degenerate friend, and there's nothing he has to do. Yeah, like that's going to happen. So, and it was a blast. I don't regret it at all. But then I just wanted to keep that going. I was like, I need like 2, 3, 4 years of just sort of letting loose, or maybe I don't need it, but I want it. And so I was not thinking about what I want to do professionally. I thought sort of in an abstract way, maybe I'll do finance because that's how you make a lot of money. And it's always been interesting to me to make a lot of money. Although it gets less interesting each year. We can go into that. But that was abstract, right? First and foremost, like I want to make a lot of friends. I want to go to a lot of parties. I want to do fun things because I had always been on a strict schedule. Like I had an intense soccer schedule in high school, and I wasn't going to play in college. And so I was like, let me just let loose. And I did. But that started changing end of sophomore year where I was like, all right, I got to actually start figuring out what I like to do and want to do. Because also at that point, it became clear that I did not want to do finance. I had talked to a lot of people who went that route, as well as the consulting route, and they were all miserable. And I was like, oh, this is sort of like a narrative violation in my head. Like, I don't think I want to be miserable, So then I was like, oh shit, all right, like figure it out, and started getting more diligent with and intentional with my life.
Given the environment that you were in, and given that, again, you mentioned structured being a big part of your life, Um, did you ever have like a, I don't want to say existential crisis, but did you ever have a moment of like what the hell am I going to do if I don't do, one of the traditional routes?
No, I know I'm a fairly low stress person. I don't get anxious about almost anything. Even if I'm in a really anxiety inducing environment, I don't really get anxious. Um, so I had a lot of uncertainty, but that wasn't like eating away at me. One thing I'll say is I always want to be the best at whatever I'm doing. I don't like playing games where there's no path for me to dominate the game. Doesn't mean I always do, but I need it to be feasible that I can dominate it. And so I looked at like finance. Well, first of all, I looked around. I was at Harvard, right? Very smart kids. I was, my rooming group, maybe bottom 30% in terms of just raw intelligence. And then I was like, okay, these people plus all these other people are going to go to investment banking or go work for McKinsey. Can I dominate them at that? I don't think I can. Like, their raw intelligence is higher, and like, what's my edge there? I don't have an edge there. And so that just became, first of all, the bad lifestyle and all the people who were doing it who were miserable. That was a deterrent. But a much bigger deterrent was I don't think I have a path to dominate everyone else this way. And then it got really uninteresting. And so then it just became about how do I find that thing where I can dominate? And, it took me 3.5, 4 years out
Really?
of college to figure that out.
I'm really fascinated by the mindset here. Let's dig into two things. The fact that um, your anxiety, let's say, isn't easily triggered. Where do you think that comes from? That ability to be even keeled and not necessarily, and it's fine. There's obviously it's great. It's just more around. Um, it's fair to say that you're less likely to be triggered from an anxiety perspective than most people. Is there anything that you would say has driven that?
Like, there are moments where I'm anxious, stepping onto the field for the state cup final. That's
Yeah.
you're anxious, or standing on a stage and you're anxious. So it's not, I just say like more broadly, I'm not, I don't, that whole thing of, oh, I couldn't go to sleep because my mind was racing. Doesn't really happen to me. Sorry, what outside of that, what was the second piece of that question?
No, then where I was going with that is around, you're an entrepreneur. And, as an entrepreneur, every entrepreneur that's come on this show, there's no such thing as a straight line to success there. And we're going to dive into your journey, and I'm going to have you walk us through that. But has your journey as an entrepreneur changed your outlook or your ability to handle high stress moments?
Yeah. So okay. The second piece is like experience makes you less anxious, and there's like dominoes, right? So the first one would be just like experience, meaning you just live through tough stuff. Then the next domino to fall is you're more confident, and then the next domino to fall is therefore you're less anxious. So I just think once you've seen something enough times, and also you realize you're not made out of glass, you know, um, you get less anxious because, and that is entrepreneurship, right? You're always getting punched in the mouth. And then you take like 20 punches to the mouth and you realize, oh, I didn't crumble. And so then you're just like, oh, well, I'm way tougher than I thought. And so you're just kind of more even keeled after that. Everyone in year one of entrepreneurship is like a basket case to some degree. It's all relative, but you can get pretty tough pretty quick. And your experience is so accelerated that even just 1 year, you're like experienced, quote unquote. And then 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you're like a veteran, right? Like I'm 33. I've been in the startup game for 7 years. I feel like I've been in it for 30 years because first of all, I worked longer hours for years, but just like everything's so much more intense and compact and high stakes that like, I could teach a class on it, I think, at least in consumer goods. So And that's what's great and sometimes stressful
No,
about
that's
startups.
very fair. I mean, you're right. I mean, experience is the main experience is where you learn. That's where it all comes from. That's what you fall back on anytime something bad happens. You remember the last time something bad happens, and then you realize that you can handle it.
But I actually don't
Uh,
even think it's necessarily like granular experience, meaning, oh, I saw this exact scenario and, I can now apply that somewhere else. I think it's like, no, you just went through many hard things and you got experience at like the principles level. And those same principles can be applied in many different areas. I think people get into trouble when they're like, oh, I'm a veteran of this industry and then I can plug myself into a startup because I have experience. And that's like the worst manifestation of leveraging experience.
I agree. Before we move on and start talking about sophomore year and what happened there in the transition, what was the hardest thing you had to deal with up until that point in your life?
I mean, there were like micro hard things. Like I got, robbed at knife point and gunpoint in South Africa. Those were hard. Those were kind of stressful but they were very poignant. It wasn't like, oh, I went through depression for 12 straight months. Like, no, it was an event happened and I moved on. Um, I'll be completely honest. There wasn't that much that was hard for me in high school. And there wasn't that much that was hard for me in my gap year. Harvard was hard in the sense that it was the first place where I was like, oh, I'm like definitely not the smartest person here, like by a long shot. And that was interesting because you have to adapt, especially as someone who um, is used to being more capable than other people. You're like, oh, I'm like not the alpha here. And so it gets back to what I was saying earlier. How do you psychologically shift and accept that, or figure out a way to play a different game than other people are playing, such that you can be the alpha in across vectors you care about? You're never going to be the best across everything, but how do you just play a different game and therefore retake the lead, so to speak?
That's got to be a common, state of occurrence in those kind of institutions, in those top schools. There's probably a lot of people coming from different places where they were the top dogs. And then all of a sudden they are amongst a lot of other people who are, just as, if not more capable in certain respects. And so, thanks for pointing that out. And that gives us some really, really good background into just who you were before. Now we'll talk about the evolution and transitioning into Will, the entrepreneur. Talk to us about what happened now, sophomore year, as you're thinking through this.
Well, first of all, I didn't like any class I took. I found it boring and it was like going to class until I took an intro psychology course. That's actually a really hard course. People, struggled to get an A in the course. And I also found it to be hard, but it was the first course that didn't feel like a class. I was like, oh, I'm excited to go to this class. And the guy's name was Dan Gilbert, really charismatic teacher. And so I just fell in love with psychology. And then I wanted to learn more on the physiological side. So I took a bunch of cognitive neuroscience classes and I was like fascinated with anything brain related. And that was the only thing I was interested in. I wasn't really interested in, math or history or whatever. I was like, this one thing that's just so fascinating to me. And so I took every class I could. And then I also, though, was interested in business because startups were cool at that time. And again, remember, I want to make a lot of money someday. And so what's the intersection of psychology and business? And it's organizational behavior. And so I found this organizational behavior professor at HBS, which was a field I hadn't heard of until I did some Googling. And I was like, I just emailed the guy and I was like, hey, can I work for you for free? So this was my senior year. I ended up working for him for free. And I got to sit in on these Harvard Business School classes in organizational behavior. And I freaking loved it. And so then I was like, okay, how do I turn this into a job? Because this is the only thing I've ever been really interested in. And it's at the intersection of the mind and business, these other two things, that I find to be cool. How do I like do this professionally and make a lot of money at it? Because that is a common through line. And there really is no way. Like that's what I learned. There kind of is no way. I mean, I guess you could be like a CEO coach or something and, charge 50 grand an hour, and which literally I thought about. I then went and met a CEO coach and I was like, how do I get to be this guy? But then his life kind of sucked too, because he was always traveling, with the executives, and they were at his, he was at their beck and call. And I was like, man, that lifestyle kind of sucks too. And so I ran out of time. I got to be a senior and I was like, I'm out of time. And so where was I? I knew all these things I was interested in. None of them mapped to a career, but I also didn't want to be a consultant or a banker. And so I took a job. I showed up hungover to the interview. It was what you could check like 50 boxes on the Harvard Career Services thing and auto apply. And a lot of them, like all you need to do is upload a resume. There wasn't even a cover letter. And it was just like one of the 50, like nothing special. I'd never heard of the company. Showed up hungover. I went out like hard the night before, was viciously hungover, sat down at this table in a cafe with a guy named Jamie, who friends with to this day. He was an ex-Deloitte monitor management consultant. Grilled me for a while, went really well, didn't think much about it, left, went on with my life. And then, like a week later, I get a call and he's like, I'd like to offer you a job. And then, there was nothing else going on for me at that time. And I thought about it and I was like, okay, like that's a job. It was pretty well paying and I had no other thing to do. So that's where I was at. And then that kicked off this 3.5-year adventure of selling supply chain and operations software to oil and gas companies, which is like, who would have ever thought I'd be doing that? But I was flying to Houston and selling $200,000 a year software to some guy in cowboy boots who worked at Chevron.
Huh. Where were you based?
I was based in Boston.
You're based in Boston?
But I was flying to Houston. So I was in Chinatown area of Boston, software startup. They started in utilities, but then they brought in all these ex-consultants. So this guy, Jamie, and then this other guy, Paul, and to build out the oil and gas business. And so then all of us were flying, where everything is in Houston and oil and gas. We were always flying to Houston, sometimes Oklahoma, sometimes Denver, but like pretty much Houston.
Yeah. What was going on inside at that point in terms of just fulfillment at that point in life?
Well, all my friends were doing better than me financially, which is really, it's like at that age, that's how you measure stuff. You're like, oh, they got, I was making $65K out of school and I was like, yeah, that's fine. But, they were making $100K or $125K or whatever. So it was like, you do the self-talk of, well, but they're so unhappy and yada, yada. But still, you're like, they're kind of beating me. And then also I didn't really like oil and gas and I didn't really like software. And there were things to do that I got good at them. This is like a weird dynamic, right? When you get really good at something, but you don't like it, it's a weird dynamic. It reminds me of the Andre Agassi book, which I've actually never read, but someone was telling me there's a great first line where he goes like, he opens with like, I hate tennis or something like that.
I think someone mentioned that to me too. Yeah.
And I thought that was like the coolest thing ever. Like what a great example of that. Like he's so freaking good, won all these majors. He's like, I fucking hate tennis. So that's kind of how I felt about my job. I was like, I'm really good at this. I can command a room. I could sell stuff good analytically, but I fucking hate this. And so, okay, what do you do with that? Because also you only have one career experience. So you can't be like, well, but it was better than that. It's like, oh, maybe this just is work. Maybe just work sucks. And you talk to 10 people and they're like, yeah, work kind of sucks. You're like, oh, well, maybe that's just life now. But I never could accept that.
Hey, Mile 40 fam. I get asked a lot about my training programs and how I set myself up for success to cross finish lines all over the world. Well, I'm going to let you in on a secret. Recovery is half the battle. And in order to get that recovery, I rely on clean sources of protein. That's why My go-to protein shake is Owen. Only what you need. I have one after every single workout. 100% vegan and plant-based, Owen's plant-based shakes use a multi-source protein blend of pea, pumpkin seed, and flax seeds to include all essential amino acids to promote optimal daily health. Uncompromised taste. Owen brings together the essential elements of advanced nutrition, amazingly clean ingredients, functional superiority, and uncompromised taste. Now go ahead, go to www.liveowen.com. That's spelled LIVEOWYN.com. Use code MILE40 for 20% off your next purchase. Only what you need. Well, you mentioned earlier on, and you brought it back up slightly now, how your relationship with money has evolved over the years. And it sounds like this was the phase where, money was a priority because, to your point, and especially then, I mean, you talk about 65K versus 100K. The truth of the matter is 65K is good for most people, but if you're coming out of Harvard, you should be making more than 65K. At least that's what people are thinking, right? Like, it's like you're coming out of Harvard, your first job pays you more than 65K. You didn't pay a Harvard tuition and work that hard to come out and make 65K a year. As good as that is for the majority of us. And so there had to be something going on there. So I don't know if it's too early to ask this question or if we want to keep talking about how we got, through starting the business to ask you about your relationship with money.
No, I mean, it's never too early. Yeah, I mean, I always wanted a lot of it, which I already said, but that, what does that even mean? That's just like sort of an abstract thought. Like, oh, I want to be able to buy whatever I want and have a big house, whatever. It was always abstract. So that 65 number doesn't mean anything, right? It only means something relative to, oh, but my friend's making that, like, so it's weird in that way, but then, I mean, look, I still want to make a lot of money. That doesn't change. And frankly, is a huge motivator in entrepreneurship, especially because entrepreneurship is our society is engineered around the fact that entrepreneurship is the best way to make a lot of money very quickly. That just is what it is. The tax code is structured that way, even way more so even than employees making money off a startup. To found, grow, and sell a startup is the way to make a lot of money. It's kind of the only way other than inheriting a lot. And so it's like evolved actually as the business got to be now kind of big. Now my thinking has evolved because I start thinking about, oh, well, what if we were to sell this? How would my life change? Like, we're far enough in where it gets more real, and it's never real till it's real, but at least you have these thoughts of, oh, what if? And then you get into, how would my routine change? Would I travel? Would I not travel? Blah, blah, blah. And you take the abstract and you make it real. And what you quickly realize is, well, actually almost nothing changes. Oh, by the way, you also have a lot of conversations with people who have had some windfall, and they tell you that same thing too. So just like I called all those consultants and bankers, I was like, hey, you're 2-3 years in at McKinsey. Do you like your life? You do the same thing with people who had achieved some liquidity event. Hey, you achieved that liquidity event. Do you regret it? Do you like it? What have you done differently? Do you travel more? Blah, blah, blah. And what you quickly learn is the cliche is true. First of all, like, a lot of these people aren't happy, or they're no more happy than they otherwise would be. Like, the money didn't make them happier. They don't do much different. They're like, yeah, I kind of sat around and then I got back to work. So, okay, that didn't really change anything, and blah, blah, blah. And so it just, I don't know, it gets less interesting. It gets a lot less interesting. And what you realize is, like, the work is what's fun, and freedom and agency and impact is really fun, like way more fun than money.
Speaking my language, man. I
Yeah.
agree with you 100%. And I think that a lot of people need to hear that from someone like you, from someone who's built something, and who has the, um, ab- the ability to make the ask of someone who's gone through the liquidity event, and to kind of like try to understand what that's like, because it's naturally the next phase for you. I mean, like, you can keep doing what you're doing forever, or you can ultimately sell and then do something else. There's really, like, in my opinion, those are really the only two options. I don't know what else you could possibly do. Um, and so, getting that perspective allows you to make a very thoughtful decision on, how you want to proceed with, the next 3, 5, 10 years of not only your business but your life. And so it goes beyond that.
Also, you develop as an entrepreneur so much muscle memory, including like brain muscle memory, that I think it to a degree permanently changes you as a person. And you can't not have a project you're intensely working on. I just don't think you can do that. And so leisure based on that becomes not the goal. In fact, it becomes the antithesis of the goal. So, which is funny, right? Because when you're a kid, you're like, oh, that's the end goal, leisure. You can retire at 35, and that's when you made it. And of course, it's the exact opposite. And I think your body and brain learn it's the exact opposite by living through entrepreneurship. Because, I mean, talk to any entrepreneur who goes on vacation, right? Day 2, their foot's tapping a little bit, So it's, you don't be unhealthy, right?
Yeah,
But
but it's your baby, your business, like,
But
I
even
get it.
beyond this business, something has to be my baby. And maybe my baby won't be my baby, right? So maybe I'll look at fatherhood that way, and you're like, ooh, how do I optimize? I want my kid to be great, and whatever that means. And I want to be the best dad I can be, and all that. And so maybe my baby's going to be my baby.
Yeah. No, makes perfect sense. So, let's make sure the audience gets a good understanding now with regards to how IQBAR was born. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So, like I said, I was not that into software or oil and gas. And so and then again, I was like self conscious. Ooh, I'm lagging these other people. And that whole thing of I need to dominate something or have a path to domination. So, okay, that all rolls up into what? I need to start a company. And okay. And then also I need to fully be able to wrap my head around the thing I'm making. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a coder. I'm not going to make an app or a website, but I think I can make a consumer good. And I had my kitchen, right? I lived in a apartment in Boston. I had my kitchen. I didn't have an R&D lab. I didn't have, I had my kitchen. So it was like, and then I read a book called Mission in a Bottle by the guys who started Honest Tea. And the guy went to Harvard. He was a government major at Harvard, which actually that was my major. I minored in psych and neuroscience. There were all these parallels. He went into consulting, hated it, and he was walking in the park and he drank some iced tea. This is how he tells the story. He's like, whoa, that's way too sweet. And then he's like, well, what if this was half as sweet? And then he goes on this whole journey of starting Honest Tea. And I was like, whoa, I'm that guy. Like I just massively identified with him. And I even emailed him. I was like, I just read your book. It blew my mind. Are you ever going to be in New England? Can I meet up? And he's like, oh, I'm giving a teaching thing in like New Hampshire. I didn't have a car at the time. I rented a car, drove up to New Hampshire just to sit down with the guy. His name's Seth Goldman. So I was like, okay, I'm this guy. So what am I going to do though? And again, I was interested in the brain thing from before. And so I just started looking at the market and I was like, oh, I'm going to make like a brain functional drink. And no, I'm going to make a brain functional this and that. And it had to be a giant category because I had to build a giant business again, because I need to be prominent, right? And make a lot of money. How do you do that? You attack big categories. So bars. Oh, and by the way, the RX bar sale had happened recently too, and that kind of impacted me. I was like, oh, the bar in category is kind of interesting. This guy grew it to 120 million, sold for 600, like mega outcome. Like, what's that space look like? And then I eventually was like, okay, brain food. No one's doing brain food. Everything's body, 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 digestion, weight loss, muscle building. Why is nothing brain related? And that was it. I was like, I just latched onto that, and I was going to call it Noggin Bar. And I was like, no, that's stupid. And that's like there's a Nickelodeon channel that's called Noggin. And I don't want it, like to be brain this, because you don't want to feel like you're eating an organ. IQ, like that's ethereal. That's like brief, like blah, blah, blah. And so, and then that set off, I was still working at Power Advocate, the startup, by the way. And so that kicked off like a wild year of just self-teaching myself food science and making thousands of prototypes in my kitchen. But a key point in that period was I realized I couldn't do it. I couldn't do them both. And so I went into my boss's office one day and I said, and he knew I kind of wanted to be an entrepreneur at some point. I was like, we both know I'm not going to be here forever. I want to be an entrepreneur. Two things can happen. I could leave and do it full time. It's not great for me because I have no grocery money. It's not great for you because I'm kind of hard to replace and I have all this institutional knowledge. Or you could cut my hours in half and cut my salary in half. I can survive and spend those hours helping you, and you can look for a replacement over 6 months. And then I can have enough money to survive and have more hours to do this thing. It's like, let me think about it. And the next day he said, okay. So that was a huge unlock because I wasn't super time pressed. I could take my time. I wasn't like, oh, I have runway. Like, no, I have infinite runway because I have enough for my groceries and rent. So yeah, over the course of a year, I iterated a zillion times. And then the culmination of that was, okay, I have a prototype. I'm going to run a Kickstarter. If this works, the market wants it. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And maybe I'll just go back to my job.
Yeah. When did the Kickstarter go live?
So that was December 17 through Jan 18.
Okay. And how much did you raise?
So yeah, we did just about 75K. And then we did another 15-ish K on Indiegogo through this like overflow kind of mechanism. So basically we sold $90,000 of product in 2 months, which is epic, right? We had sold $0 of product till then. So we were like, okay, this is a good idea.
When you say we, was there anyone else involved with you?
It's funny. Yeah, it's always weird to say just I, right? This was another wild one, right? So I had a couple of friends who did go the startup route, and this was a useful juxtaposition for me. They raised $3 million on, I think it was either 7 million pre-money valuation, 10 million post-money, or it was 10 million pre-13 post, but whatever. It was on some like good valuation, and they raised enough money to pay themselves good money, and they had no trouble. Like they co-founded it together. So there was no issue of, oh, who's going to found this with me? And all that was happening while I was ideating all this. And so it's like, ooh, I need a co-founder. This is going to be so lonely. I need someone to do this with. And so it's like, but who's going to do a protein bar? Or like at that point, it wasn't even a protein bar. It was just a bar or snack startup. This is so unsexy. I can't pay them anything. I can pay them nothing. And it was just so interesting because the juxtaposition of my friends doing all that, I was like, I can't raise any money. I can't pay anyone anything. No one from my Harvard class is going to quit their job at freaking Morgan Stanley to go do it. Like, that's crazy. It makes no sense. And so, but yeah, I found this one guy who worked with my wife, now wife, then girlfriend. And he was like in marketing. And I was like, oh, like maybe this guy could help me out. And he helped me with the Kickstarter. And it just sort of bumbled along. And I was like, shit or get off the pot. Like, are you all in or not? And he said, like, no, basically. So I was a solo founder, not because I wanted to be, but because I literally couldn't find or convince someone to do it. Meanwhile, best thing that ever happened to me. But in the moment, that was like crushing. It was like, because you don't have that person to turn to and say, oh, we're not crazy. It was just
Yeah, and
me.
that person didn't believe in it as much as you did, or wasn't willing to risk it, as much as you were.
Yeah, which I think, I guess if I had lower self-esteem or whatever, and I'd be like, oh shit, I am crazy. But I just didn't feel, I don't know why, but I didn't feel
You
that
need to
way.
be a little bit crazy to kind of to take these leaps. Like there's an element of crazy always involved. Look, you need to be a little crazy to formulate in your kitchen for as long as you did, right? To go on an idea that it was a good idea, but it's an idea that no one else had done before, and generally to do something that no one else has done before, it involves a little bit of crazy, at least by societal standards, right? Like you're doing the thing that other people have stayed away from, and um, I feel like now it's a field that probably has a lot more competition. But at the time when you did the Kickstarter, were you starting to see competition at that point from like a brain food?
And even now there's really not. I mean, we're an N of one still today, pretty much. I mean, there's a couple sort of ankle biter competitors in the, like, let's say brain and body bar space, but I mean, we are 10 times bigger than the next biggest. So, um, we were an N of one then, and we still are today. But the competitive thing is so interesting, and this was a huge learning on like the branding, positioning, sales, and marketing side of, we actually over time leaned away from the brain piece, and order of operations and positioning matters a lot. So you could say, oh, we're the brain bar, but we also have protein, and we also have 1 gram of sugar. We also taste good, and we also have a good price point. But you led with the brain thing, or you could invert that. You could say, hey, we're a plant protein bar. We have 1 gram of sugar, affordable price point. Oh, and by the way, there's this like little plus here. It has things like, omega-3s and flavonoids and lion's mane and blah, blah, blah. It has these brain benefits. That's the end, right? And that's the little plus. I had already like 75% hooked you through those other things. I allowed you to check, 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 check. Oh, plus those two things sound similar. They're radically different, radically different. And the total addressable market of the second one is radically bigger. So we don't even position ourselves necessarily as, oh, we're brain food or whatever. That's how we started. Quickly, we learned actually you have to invert, meet people where they are, be relatable. If I'm at Costco demoing, you need to get who we are in 10 seconds. And so the thing maybe that you think is why we're differentiated is, I don't know, maybe 10% of our
No,
actual
that's fair. I mean,
differentiation.
my next question was, tell me, what have you learned about your consumer right now with regards to people that are picking up the bars? Like, I can tell you that when I'm in a rush and I'm hungry and I'm on the go and like I have no choice but to walk into a 7-Eleven, a gas station, whatever it is, I'm literally just looking at which one has the highest protein number. And generally speaking, that's the one that I'm going to pick up. Unless there's a brand that I know that I like really like, and I'm going to pick that one up. What have you learned about your customers, and what they look at with regards to everything that's being marketed on the bar?
Yeah, I mean, so there was no data on a company like ours, really. There's data on protein bars and things like that, but not on like our specific spin on it. But yeah, we just sort of looked at data. So first and foremost, like women are predominant consumer, not by a ton, but 65-35, call it. Um, but that's not all that weird, right? Women buy most consumer goods more than men. Um, but bars is like actually a little bit even more weighted. So that held true. Um, and then we did a ton of post-purchase surveys, and we're like, why do you buy us? And always number 1 and 2 were sugar/net carbs, and then like plant protein. And then 3 would be like just general clean label. You don't have weird stuff, sucralose or blah, blah, blah. And that was kind of shocking and a little bit of a hit, right? Because it's the classic thing of don't market what you want to market what they want to be
Yeah, what they
marketed to
want to see.
themselves.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, like like our customers have spoken. And so that changes everything. That changes what you supersize on your packaging. It changes what you call yourself as a brand. It changes who you target. Um, So, we learned that, and I'm sure none of this is surprising, but like protein slash source of protein, that's a big one too. Plant protein versus whey, and sugar and net carbs were like the biggest things. So, and by the way, in the middle of us scaling up our business, keto happened, which was just a mega trend. And so that was our first lucky break. We just sort of backed into keto because we made it low sugar, low carb for the brain benefits. You're not crashing mentally. Well, it just so happened the entire country just exploded on keto, mostly for weight loss purposes. And so we're like, oh my God, like 50% of our consumers are buying our stuff because they're on keto. That was like wild and unexpected. So we had a huge keto on it. Now keto plateaus, starts dying. Oh shit, right? There are all these brands that were keto this, keto that. They all died. We didn't. We grew right through it. Why? Because we could like pivot. Well, now we're the low sugar plant protein bar. So there's something there to being sort of ride trends, surf trends, but don't be married to trends. You need to be able to trend hop. And so my personal belief is you need to engineer a product that overlaps or intersects with at least 3 trends, because you're going to need to hop trends as dietary trends change.
That's super clever. And I imagine that, and you kind of spoke to it, you've learned this over the course of the last 7 years, because when you first started, you had an angle that you've had to pivot. I'm guessing 7 years ago, you weren't expecting the need to pivot. You were expecting like, hey, I'm onto something, that no one else has done before, and this is going to be my differentiator.
Well,
how quick did you learn you needed to pivot?
There's a couple of things. First of all, I wanted to avoid. There's this thing of don't try to be everything to everyone. I don't actually agree with that. I do, and it's contextual, right? But I wanted to. What are all the objections people have for a bar? And we now sell hydration mixes and coffee too, so we do this exercise for everything. But what are all the objections? And can I eliminate all of them? You can never eliminate all of them, but like, could I get pretty close? So it's clean label, but it's also low sugar, but it's also plant protein, and it's also an affordable price point. Could I check every box? Because that is better than not checking every box. And so that just sort of the byproduct of that is you're good in like 3 or 4 ways. It's not always good to be good at 3 or 4 ways, because you're conflicting and try to be everything to everyone. You're nothing to no one. But in our category, it is actually good for the exact reason I just mentioned. You can lean into a couple. It's almost like a diversified stock portfolio in a product. Pieces of that product will become less, or aspects of the product will become less desirable as things change, and others will become more desirable. Versus, let's say, RX bar, right? There's a moment in time when simplicity was king, and they capitalized it. And they did that one thing really, 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 really well, scaled massively, sold. But since it's sold, I don't know. I think it's whatever. I don't know what it's done. But that then actually didn't become king during keto, right? Actually, people stopped caring about simplicity for a bit there. Oh shit! What if your one thing was simplicity? You're screwed. And so there is no ability to hop. So I think both can work. I just prefer the more dynamic approach. It's noisier. You have less of a concrete identity, but you have much more optionality. And optionality to me is the number one thing in business and life.
Spot on. Dude, you do such a great job of the analogies and breaking this down and explaining it in a way where, an outsider who isn't going down this route can understand, and it makes you think. And I think it gives, really good insight for anyone who's potentially considering going down a similar journey. I mean, my wheels are turning, and I'm like looking at the clock, and I'm like, I could keep talking to him. I'm like, I can
let's
keep going
keep going, and cut out what's not interesting, and
I can keep going for a long time here. But let me ask you, over the last 7 years now, what's been the hardest part of this journey? And it could be either, a series of moments or one moment. Do you recall anything that you lean into as being a real learning period?
I would say it's similar to what I said earlier. There are acute moments of hardship. Like we, on our first big production run, we were producing, I think it was 200,000 bars for CVS. That was our first big brick and mortar customer. And it was make or break. We never produced, I think the biggest prior run we'd done was 30,000, and then we're doing 300 or 200,000. So our entire team piles into a car. We drive up to upstate New York where our contract manufacturer was. And it was supposed to be celebratory. It was like hot, we're going to get there and start high-fiving and film everything. And we're going to have social content. We can put it up on the socials. And we get there at like 5 a.m. because that's when manufacturers start producing stuff. And the dough mixes and it gets slabbed out and sliced and put in packages, and boom, 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 boom. They're coming offline. Great content. And, we look at it in the box. This looks freaking awesome. And we are high-fiving. Now we are high-fiving. And then this guy walks up to me, the line manager. He's like, we got a problem. The wrappers aren't sealing. I was like, oh, what? Why? Like, they're not sealing. The adhesive is not working. I was like, well, what happens? He's like, well, they're going to go bad. If there's even a micro hole in the package, oxygen gets in, it oxidizes, it spoils. There's no barrier. You're fucked. Like, this thing will be bad in 3 weeks versus 12-month shelf life. And it was like the most deflating, that like 1 10-second period after he said that was like maybe the most deflating 10 seconds of my life. And we figured it out. We got more wrappers created. We got it there next week. I drove back, produced it, got it out there. But like, that was an acute, hard moment. I would say the far harder periods, though, to my earlier analogy of, I've never been depressed for 12 months. Well, I actually have been super stressed, and I don't know if it's like insecure is the right word, but just the first couple of years, I knew so little and I was so impatient to know a lot. And everything I was doing it for the first time. Everything. Incorporating. Well, I don't know shit about law. Well, you better know a lot about it soon. E-commerce. I don't know shit about Amazon. Well, you better know a lot about it soon. D2C, brick and mortar, hiring, firing. Like, everything is really important, and yet you're doing it for the first time. It was just gnarly. It was just, I don't know how else to put it. It was a gnarly couple years there. I was working insane hours, and I was burnt out at the finish line. People usually get burnt out over time. Like, I started with the burnout and have gotten like less burnt out over time.
What are your main ways or forms of release, right? Like, if you're, under the gun, or you're just dealing with stuff like this, like, is it working out? Do you have, a community that you lean into? Is it family, friends? What are your main sources for, because like, and you mentioned it earlier, right? And again, a recurring theme on this podcast, the entrepreneurial journey is a lonely journey, like, especially when you come up with an idea like you did, and it takes some convincing at first, and then even the parts where you have to make difficult decisions, whether it be pivoting, or whether it be about personnel, or whether it be about how to handle something going wrong. Who are you leaning into, or what are you leaning into?
Yeah, I mean, there's like the table stakes: exercise, gotta exercise. Yeah. First of all, I think I would be remiss not to mention some important contextual variables. I started this when I was 26, no kids, no debt. For a year there, I mean, this could be another episode talking about this first year of the business, where I lived in my friend from college's parents' basement just to cut out rent. So yeah, but beyond like the basics, exercise and all that, I would say, I mean, having a relationship was key there. But I think the absence of things that are time sucks or energy sucks or stressful things, kids, right? Being one of them, or debt or any of those things, that was big too. So the absence of things like that was just as important as the preponderance of things like exercise. But you nailed one of them, which is just like social interaction. Who do you call? You got to have people you call. And what's cool about food and beverage, just CPG more broadly, is it's very collegial and very quickly you meet a lot of people. And so you just have a bench of people you can pick up the phone and call. Hey, how did you deal with UNFI, which is a distributor? How did you deal with, we got discontinued on this SKU or whatever. And you mostly are just commiserate. I mean, it's a form of therapy. And so that is key. I mean, I probably call still now to this day, 10 people a week. I just call them. Yo, what's up? Here's the latest with us. What's up with you? Yada, yada. Just, it's almost like microtherapy sessions. I don't go to therapy, but I have lots of microtherapy sessions just via calls to other industry friends.
That's fair. No, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that and for giving us some insight there. And yeah, I mean, I know we connected on Terry earlier on, but I see a lot of similarities between you and Terry. And to the listeners out there, Terry White was a former guest on the show, so go check out his episode as well. He talks about how he built up, his company Wolico, and I see a lot of similarities in the way both of you carry yourselves, and how you approach business in general. You strike me as someone who is proud but not satisfied. Am I reading that right? Like you're proud of the work that you've done over the years. You've built something that probably has exceeded some of your earliest expectations, but you're nowhere close to being done with regards to what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Am I correct?
Definitely. There's got to be another mountaintop. There's got to be another mountaintop. There's always got to be another mountaintop. And it doesn't have to be bigger. It just has to be new. And I think it'd be cool to be a different mountain range as well. So like we're talking about, oh, maybe your baby's your baby. Like I think fatherhood, I'll look at fatherhood and maybe as like in an entrepreneurial lens, and future business. Like, I don't know, maybe I'll try services. Like, I don't know. So no, I'm never satisfied. I have this itch to like take on hard problems. I think probably the biggest thing would just be like, I want to tackle harder problems over time. And sometimes bigger, but not necessarily, but definitely harder. So I don't know, but that changes too each year. Sometimes you talk to people, they sold their business and you're like, well, do you regret it? And a lot of them say yes. They're like, I never thought I would, but I do. Turns out it's really hard to build up something that's in a zillion distribution points and spinning off this much money. And like now I feel like I lost like a limb or something. And so I don't know. My psychology evolves. And also the job, whatever your job is, gets the funness wanes and waxes. It can be really unfun for years, and then it could just be like super fun. We became profitable. It got a lot more fun after we were profitable. Like, whoa, all right, we're not like desperate. We're not on death's doorstep. Like, that's a lot more fun of an existence. So, okay, that changes your psychology. Let's keep going. This is fun. So it's, you got to kind of take stock with yourself each year in that regard.
Yeah, no, I think you answered where I wanted to go with this. My next question is going to be around like, so why do you keep showing up? Do you keep showing up because, there is that fear, and fear might not be the right word, but there's that hesitation about what might be on the other side, especially after gathering the feedback around like, hey, the other side isn't necessarily that much of a greener pasture? Or is it a certain goal that's driving you to continue showing up, or is it that you're just having fun every day? And you mentioned early on, and maybe this is a good place to close this out, the gamification of business in general. You mentioned how everything is a game to you. And it sounds like you're having a lot of fun playing this game. So is that why you keep showing up? Because now you're at a point where, every day is just fun for you?
Yes. Partially there's like, you show up because that's your gig now, and I'm always like calculating opportunity, like value of things and opportunity costs. Always. I'm doing this and therefore I'm not doing all this other stuff. I'm always like, what is the opportunity cost of me doing this for another year? But it's such a massive bird in the hand, and there has to be just big things that to shift the object in motion that is my current existence. But surely at some point there's something where it's like, oh, that's another game. And that game looks like fun, and I think I'd learn a lot, and it would be exciting, and the opportunity cost is just too great. So I'm going to hop games now and play that game. But like, work is the point of life, is like something I realized. And that sounds weird because people are like, oh, no, it isn't. Be with your family. And but that is work. Like, I think you need to expand your definition of work. Work is just another way of saying taking on projects, because we know that leisure doesn't make you happy. There's enough data to prove that. So if that doesn't make you happy, it has to be work. And then it's just, what's the best work? That's why, like, the money thing, you get a bunch of money. Well, who cares? You're still going to be working, because that's the only path to happiness. And the money's only useful if it helps you play a more fun game, if it helps you work in a more fun and or fulfilling game or way. So if it's always going to be work, really the goal is find the most fun work/game. But, and I'll end with this caveat, can't hop too much. Right? I was saying earlier, you have these years that suck and then it gets fun. You have to give it whatever your number is, let's say 3 years, because things that suck can pivot into not sucking really fast. And it can like even invert. It could be like the worst thing ever becomes the most fun thing ever in 1 year. You get Walmart. Oh, that just right-sized our financials. Now I can hire the people that I couldn't, and now I have more time. Now I'm doing this other, like, what a difference a year makes. And then, but the people who quit before they hit that, because that game wasn't fun for years 1 and 2, well, they just screwed themselves. They were a year away from a really fun game. So that would be the only caveat to that, is don't just like be hopping sort of aimlessly. Give everything the college try for X number of years.
Beautifully said, man. Thank you for just dropping it all on us. We could record over and over again, because I got a lot of questions I could ask you, but I just want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing your journey, imparting your wisdom, throwing out a lot of tidbits that are really relatable as it pertains to finding yourself in an environment where, it's easy to be intimidated by those around you, telling us that it's okay to not necessarily have it all figured out at once, and look, go on to build something just truly great and distinguished, and being open and vulnerable about the fact that the micro hurdles along the way helped build the organization that now everybody knows about. So I just want to say thanks for coming on, my man.
Thanks for having me. Let's do it again sometime.
You got it.